Chapter 14. Jabir tenderly stroked his fingers over the large grass and hardened mud home of his ticklebugs. There were hundreds of the small furry creatures sleeping peacefully inside. His gaze swept over the garden. It was unlike any garden he had ever seen before. At first he had been afraid to be there alone. Phoenix had stayed with him for a while before she went to the other side of the huge room. Every once in a while, he would catch a glimpse of her when she flew up toward the ceiling. He didn't know what she was doing, but he had to admit he was glad he had the singing plants instead of the chomping, stomping furniture and boxes on the other side of the long room. "Jabir," Zohar said breathlessly. "Eek!" Jabir squeaked, turning and holding out the large egg-shaped nest in front of him. "You scared me!" Jabir scowled at Zohar and Balint when they grinned back at him. His fingers itched to wake the creatures inside and sick them on his two friends. Instead, he carefully turned and set it on one of the large open flowers. "We's came to see if yous needed any helps," Balint said. "I's never been ups here before." "Me's neither," Jabir admitted. "I's like this parts. It's not as scary as the forests or the attics. Yous needs to see under the castle. It's lots of fun," Zohar said. "I's been alls over the castle with my mommy." Jabir grimaced and shook his head. "I's likes the talking flowers. I's don't have no more critters with me. Daddy says I could only brings 5 this time," he said with a sigh. "Mommy says that's okay, 'cause we can always find more on our trips." Zohar stared around him with a frown. He could only see the one egg-shaped nest. "Did you brings any mores?" he asked. Jabir shook his head. "I's just has the one nest of ticklebugs. I's didn't wants to brings my other animals. They's might gets hurt," he said in a slightly defensive tone. "My ticklebugs are tougher. I don't thinks the queen can hurts them." "What if she slaps them?" Balint asked. Jabir smiled brightly. "Then they gets really mad and tickles you really, really bads," he said. "Yous can't squish them. Daddy already's tried that. Last times he laughed for 2 whole days." "Are you done, then?" "We were checking to see if anyone's need helps," Balint said. "No, I's done," Jabir admitted with a sigh. "Precious, I's needs my armor," he said, turning to the symbiote who was inspecting all the different plants. Within seconds of Jabir's request, a small section of gold separated from Precious's body and flowed toward Jabir. It wrapped protectively around him. A small helmet formed over his head while arm, chest, and leg plates covered his body. With a click of his tongue, his own small symbiote shifted into a werecat. Well, more of a were-kitten, but its sharp teeth warned anything to approach with care. Precious had shifted as well, becoming a large werebeast with a saddle. The symbiote carefully lowered itself to the floor and waited until Jabir climbed onto its back. Once Jabir was seated, the creature rose to his feet. "I's ready," Jabir told the other 2 boys. "Wow," Balint whispered in awe. "Yous looks just like a warrior." Jabir looked down at Zohar and Balint with a serious expression. "I's am a prince of Valdier. I's am a warrior." Zohar nodded. "You's a mighty warrior, Jabir," he whispered, before he glanced at Balint. "Let's go sees what's Phoenix is doings." Phoenix glided through the thick rafters of the attic, enjoying the feel of flying. The faster she flew, the wider the streams of dark ribbons trailed behind her. She swerved in and out between the pieces of rough wood before curving in a delicate turn and doing another flight around the room. She had just made her last pass when Harvey alerted her that she was no longer alone. Slowing, she released the strands and glided down to the boys who were staring up at the ceiling with their mouths hanging open. She shifted as she landed, taking several steps at the same time until she was silently standing in front of them, waiting for their responses. "Wows, Phoenix," Jabir whispered, almost falling off Precious when he leaned back to stare upwards. "How did yous do that?" Phoenix stared at each of the boys before she looked away. She gazed down at the floor and ran her left foot along the rough wood surface. Biting her lip, she looked back at the boys to see if she had frightened them, but they were still gazing upward, enthralled by the swirling black cloud with the star-filled center. "I's making a mirror," she whispered, staring up at her creation. "That don't looks like no mirror I's ever seen befores," Balin muttered, before he cleared his throat and gave her an apologetic look. "I's likes it. It just don't looks like the mirrors in my house." "Mine's either," Jabir murmured. "I see colors." Phoenix smiled at Jabir. The smaller boy was lying back along Precious's back, gazing up at her creation with wonder and fascination. She started when Zohar touched her arm. "What's it do?" he asked in a curious voice. Phoenix turned her gaze to Zohar's serious golden eyes. She could see the curiosity in them, but also a little bit of caution, as if he was a little bit afraid. She rubbed her hands together. "I's made a playground," she said. "Yous can floats inside it and see all kinds of things. Spring and I plays in one alls the time. I's thought if the queen sees how pretty the worlds are, she won't want to takes the babies." "Can we plays in it?" Jabir asked in excitement, suddenly sitting up and almost falling off of Precious. Phoenix shook her head. "No, I cans only makes them sometimes," she admitted with a rueful smile. "I's not strong enough to makes more in the same day." "Oh," Jabir replied with a disappointed sigh. "Okay." "We's going to go sees what the others are doing. Do yous wants to come?" Zohar asked, pulling his gaze away from the swirling cloud. "No, I's staying here," she replied. "I's gots to be close to it, or it goes aways." "Okay," Zohar murmured in a distracted tone before he shook his head. "We's going to go sees what Amber and Jade's booby trap looks likes." Phoenix nodded and smiled. She watched the boys follow the tracks of the ride out of the attic before shifting once again. While she might look like a dragon from a distance, up close she was far different from the other dragonlings. Instead of scales, her body was covered in delicate black feathers. Her wings shimmered, glowing with the power contained inside her. Phoenix knew deep down that she was different from the others, including her slightly older twin sister. Spring had inherited the scales and eyes of the Valdier, while Phoenix had inherited the very spirit captured within her mother, a spirit that had caught the attention of the goddess herself. "They loves you," her dragon whispered as they soared upward. "But what if they become afraid of me one day?" Phoenix murmured. "They always loves you," her dragon repeated with a slightly stubborn pout to her voice. Phoenix wasn't so sure. She had seen the hint of fear in Zohar's eyes. How long would it take for Jabir's enthusiasm or Balin's curiosity to also change? She could feel her throat closing with fear when a sudden wave of warmth engulfed her. She looked wildly around for the familiar source. A wave of excitement surged through her when she saw Ikaterina's soothing face. "I missed you," Phoenix whispered, flying up into the swirling cloud and into the mirror of space. "I missed you as well, little one," Ikaterina responded, reaching out to wrap Phoenix in her arms. "Trust your dragon, Phoenix. She is very wise, even for being so young." Phoenix snuggled against Ikaterina and stared out at the swirling worlds around her. This was her playground. She and her sister loved exploring in this world. It was their magical place at night after their parents went to bed. "Now, tell me what you little ones are up to this time, and are Arilla and Arosa helping you?" Ikaterina asked in a teasing tone, even though she already knew the answer.